I always wanted to be a film star, and still do.
I've known you over 40 years, and I just want to, you've got a wonderful mind for recollection. I wasn't born in the 30s, and that's when you were a child, of course, growing up. Tell us a bit about your early years.
I was born in Farnham in Surrey because my father was in the army and stationed at Aldershot, and married my mother down there, and I was conceived down there, but at the age of 3 or 4 weeks my father finished his time and came up to Leicestershire to the headquarters to finish his time in the army, and we settled in a village called Wigston. We then moved from there to a council estate which is now known as Lansdowne Grove. In our day it was known as Rat Alley because it was adjacent to the council tip, and our house was only about 50 yards from the rubbish, and that's why it was called Rat Alley. We used to get the rats in the house all the time. Anyway, we eventually moved from there, and we moved a lot. We went to Wigston Magna, then we went to Wigston Fields, and as I say, we moved a lot, mostly at night with a handcart. And it was when I was in Rat Alley, actually, that I did my first ever performance at the South Wigston Working Men's Club. And my stage, believe it or not, was 2 beer cases and a plank. And I performed on there, and the next day I was 8 years of age. I was carted off to the a place because I had scarlet fever, which was very infectious, and I was in there and nobody was allowed apart from the nurses to come and see me. My parents couldn't come, they could only speak to me through the glass. But whilst I was there, my father, I was there for I think something like 4 months. My father bought me a little tiny ukulele and a book on how to play it, and whilst I was in there I learned how to play it. When I came out I was ready to be launched on the unsuspecting British public.
I'm leaning on the lamppost at the corner of the street in case a certain little lady comes by.
My hero, of course, was George Formby of that time, because I was born in 1928, which makes me now 87, of course. By the time I was 9, I was doing 9 entirely different acts. I was singing, dancing, playing the guitar, the mandolin, the banjolele. I was doing character comedy as a soldier, in which I sang a song called "Oh, the Colonel Was So Kind and Gentle." And I remember doing a joke about a telegram with the chairman and saying, "I've just had this telegram about my brother. Is that an O or an I?" And he said, "It's an O." And I said, "Oh, thank goodness, he shot himself." And I remember that gag. I also did a spot as a QC and sang a song called "I'm Barnaby Fee, QC, you see, at the top of the legal tree, that's me."
Preceded by a shower of flares, German bombers rained fire and high explosive bombs in their most savage attack on London.
When I was a lad, around the war years, I used to be a runner for the American Airborne. And if they wanted something, I was the one to get them it. Because I was in every fiddle you could think of at the age of 11. And all the airborne were billeted on a council estate adjunct to where I lived. And so, of course, I got in with them all, and they gave me ration. I remember the one thing that I got from them was a tin of bacon, but cooked. And it was round with greaseproof paper, and it was very, 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 very white, you know. And they used to give me that, and they used to give me all sorts of things like cigarettes, you know, for my father, and they could give me things from there. I think it was called a PX or something like that, and I used to run errands for them and get things that they couldn't get. That's what I spent my war years doing.
Have you considered how much money you spend on entertainments when you go on holiday? Concert parties, theatres, dances and shows, well, they soon run away with your money. And at Butlins, all these things are free, and you'll find a much greater choice than at most seaside resorts.
My first ever professional engagement was Butlin, not as a redcoat though, as a member of the review company. That is when I met up with Terry Scott, because I was with the same agent, the Richard Stone organisation, which I still am, after, you know, from 51. And we went to Butlins Skegness first, and the second year we went to Butlins Filey, and after that we did Piccadilly Hayride on tour, the same company, and then eventually I was sent down for an audition to the Windmill from Leicester, and I went down there and stood in a queue on the metal staircase at the Windmill, and I did my thing, and I got into it about 10 seconds, and Van Damme from the depths of the auditorium said, "Thank you," and I said, he said, "Thank you," and I left. And then for some reason I was doing a cabaret at the Dorchester, and Ken Bandy, who was the publicity man there, said to me, "You ought to do an audition at the Windmill." I said, "I've done one." And he said, "Well, I think you should do one now." And I said, "All right." So he fixed me one. It was a special one, but I still had to stand in the queue on the staircase with about 100 comics. And I got to the top, and the lady in charge there was a lady named Anne Mattel, and there was a bloke who got a drum kit and instruments, and he was in funny get-up, and he was setting it all up, and it was taking a long time. So Anne Mattel said, "Can anybody go on while we're waiting?" And I said, "Yeah, I can." And I still got my overcoat on, and I actually used the line that Ken Goodwin, I think, used afterwards. I actually went on and said, "Good morning, Mr. Van Damme. I won't take my coat off because I've been before." And he laughed. And I said, "Actually, this got nothing to do with me." I said, he obviously hadn't been before. He wouldn't bother, would he, sir?" And he starts laughing because I'm not doing. And he said, "Yeah, can you start next week?" And I said, "This isn't my act, Mr. Van Damme. I play the guitar and do He said, "Yes, I remember that. It was rubbish. But if you can do this, you can come." I found a way of talking to some non-existent person off stage. So I would do a joke, and of course it would die, because they all died. And I would do lines like, "Are you sure Bob Hope started like this?" And I used to say things like, you better start the engine. I don't think I'll be long. And I'm doing all these lines Mr. Van Damme thought were wonderful. And in fact, he asked me to stay on another year, and I said I wouldn't do it under 100 because I was only getting, I think it was 50 or 40, something like that. And he said, "I'll pay you 100. And that made me the highest paid comic who ever played the Windmill, because Arthur English was second, and he only got 75. Now, when we went to television, the BBC, Duncan Wood was the producer. He wanted us to do like a line of girls and a crossover joke, and then a juggler, then a sketch, then a line of girls. Everybody was doing that, and I said I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do a storyline. So Terry, strangely enough, didn't want to do that, but we finished up doing a storyline with us both sat in armchairs at the front, him wearing a dressing gown as the actor of the two, straight man in fact, and me in my sweaters, which created something brand new because nobody had ever done it before. And he used to say, "We're going to do a show this week about Sherlock Holmes, or the Wild West, or the First World War, or ballet." And I remember the joke we did about ballet when he said, "We're going to do a show about the ballet." I said, "The ballet?" He said, "Don't you like the ballet?" I said, "All those people going around on the tiptoes, why don't they get taller people in the first place?" And that was one of the jokes. And when we did the First World War, I remember he said to me, as a young lieutenant, silly lieutenant, he was the commanding officer. He said, "Are the men, Maynard, are the men mustered? I said, I don't know, sir, but I'm pretty hot stuff. Ha 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 ha. And those were the sort of jokes we did. But in those days, we had to have a song. And most of the comics sang, like Max Bygraves, you know, and Des O'Connor, and all these people had recording careers. My first record was made for a company called Planet Records. It was a thing called Wolf on the Prowl. But then I recorded for Decca, when there's still records about being sold, where I did Hey Lily Lily Low.
Hey Lily Lily Lily, hey Lily Lily Low, hey Lily Lily Lily, hey Lily Lily Low.
Then I recorded for EMI, and I've done several records for them. I also, in between those times, I made a record for, I can't remember, it must have been Decca, of I'm not a pheasant plucker, I'm a pheasant plucker's son, which I did in one take. And do you know how I did it in one take? In my head, I spelled pheasant with an F, and it wasn't any problem.
I'm not a pheasant plucker, I'm a pheasant plucker's son, and I'm sitting plucking pheasants till the pheasant plucker comes.
In those days, I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't go into a pub or anything like that. I'd get ravaged. I mean, my son, I don't know if he's told you, he was in the car when he was about 7 with his sister who was about 5 or 6, and with their mother, and 300 plus young ladies attacked me trying to get bits of my clothing and bits of my hair, which I had then. And I was in, it hadn't been for the security men rushing up and, you know, knocking a few of them out, they'd have probably killed me, because they really were, you know, onto me. And I had a hat on, so I used to wear quite funny hats, but they had bands round the inside. I had a straw one on, and the band got round my neck, and they were choking me. I mean, it was frightening. I was the sex symbol of the time.
The 60s. Let's come to the 60s.
The 60s, well, when I decided to go from Variety at £1,000 a week, which was a lot of money then, like 200,000 now, and I went into rep at £9. And you can't, when you're playing Schedule D, as you probably know, you pay next year for this year. And so when you go from 1,000 a week to £9 a week, it doesn't really work out, especially if they're taking about 98 pence in the pound tax. So you're left with tuppence. And I owed the Inland Revenue, so they took my house. Well, they didn't take, I sold it to pay them off. My house went, my 3 cars, I had a 104 Austin Healey, a Studebaker Commander, and my late wife's car. They all went. Everything in the house went, and we left Hampshire, where we'd gone to live, down near where I was born. So I went completely skint, and I was at the Nottingham Playhouse at the time, earning very little, a bit more than £9. I think it was up to about 25 then. And I was having to play the working men's clubs at the weekend. In fact, one day at Nottingham, because I did cabarets as well, to pay the Inland Revenue back. I never went bankrupt, but one day I did, from 10 till 1, I rehearsed The Mayor of Zalamea, which was the first translation, El Alcalde de Zalamea, which was written by Calderón de la Barca, the Spanish Shakespeare. I did that, and Ian McKellen had just come down, and we shared a dressing room, and you know, he's always been very supportive, lovely, lovely man. And then from 2 till 4, I played Bottom in A Midsummer Night's Dream for a school's matinee. From 7:30, I think it was, until about 10, I played Fred Midway in Semi-Detached, which is longer than Hamlet. After that, I got in a car and went to Leeds, where I did an hour's cabaret at the Chinchilla Club. That was my day that day. I said to Richard Stone, get me every film you can get me, because it's the only way I'm going to pay off this tax loss. And I've done some dreadful films, purely for the money.
I'll do my best. Abracadabra. It's not worked. Here, cover it in curry powder. They won't know the difference.
The greatest thing, I think, that happened to me, which changed my entire being was during my period when I was skint. I used to go to London on the train because I was in the Palladium pantomime because I hadn't got a car, and for some reason I was sent in the direction of Smith's bookstall, and there I picked up a 50p copy of a book called The Power of Positive Thinking by a man named Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, who's a doctor of divinity. So of course it was a theological book, religious, but I read at the back of the book there are certain practical lines you could follow, and one of them was to do something you feared to do each day, and then do 2 things you feared to do each day, no matter how small, then 3 things, then 4 things, 5 things. By the end of the month, you fear very little. So now I don't even fear death.
This is Granada, broadcasting to the northwest of England and the Isle of Man from the Winter Hill and associated transmitters of the Independent Broadcasting Authority.
And right out of the blue, Granada offered me a thing called The Life of Riley, which was a sitcom by Harry Kershaw, who wrote Coronation Street in those days. And I took it. And the first week, it knocked the Quatermass experiment off the #1 slot for 16 weeks. And mine went to #1. After that, they gave me This Is Your Life. But then a new head of comedy came into Granada, and he took all the programmes off that he didn't conceive, including mine, which was #1. He did ask me later on to redo it, and of course I refused. I'd been trying to get a thing done that I'd conceived with no name, all about my village where I lived in Leicestershire, in Sapcote, and I'd given it to Duncan Wood, because Duncan had always been a pal of mine from the 50s. Eventually I rang him up, I said, "Are you ever going to do anything about this programme I've given you?" And he said, "Hang on, I'm going to leave the BBC and I'm going to join Yorkshire, and it will be my first show for Yorkshire." But Roy Clark named it Oh No, It's Selwyn Froggatt. See, so thank God Roy got a few quid for that, because it was used for years. And of course it became #1. It was said, they played it about 2 or 3 years ago, and it was said that it was watched by 29 million. Whether that's true or not, I don't know.
I'll have a nice big one with onions, please.
No, lots of people remember it as Magic Al Morris, my brother. But in fact, I said magic about everything.
All right. Hey up. I'll kick the bucket. Magic.
And everybody started using the word magic, meaning wonderful, which was lovely. The 80s was when Muriel died. She was the most incredible lady I ever met in my life. I didn't know what to do, but what I did was I decided to go on the road with a group of mates, so I'd have all my friends round me. So I did all sorts of things. I did a tour of Hobson's Choice. I did 2 years as Daddy Warbucks in Annie. I just went on the road for many years, for about 8 or 9 years. And then sitting in the house one day, I had a phone call from Stuart Doughty, who rang me up. He said, "Bill, I've been given a police series to do in Yorkshire on the moors." He said, "Not titled yet." He said, "Now, I want to explain to you, it's not the lead, because we've got 2 young people, Nick Berry and Neve Cusack, playing the 2 leads. But there's a character," he said, "and I don't see it going anywhere. But," he said, "there's a character in it who's described as a little whippet of a man. And I think he should actually be Irish. But it's a character called Greengrass, who's an old rogue. And if you can make something of Greengrass, we might be able to do a spin-off. But I'll pay you your full money, you know, and which I found out a bit later on was 3 times more than Nick Berry as the lead was getting. And I was only going in half a day a week. I only had 5 lines in the opening episode, I think it was, and something like that. And eventually, you know what happened.
I mean, look at this. Would you like me to put the wind up here?
You must think I came up the river on a biscuit.
If it tickled your fancy.
And pigs might.
When I did Greengrass, I also went in and started making records. I made a record of Heartbeat, and I also made a record of Walking the Dog.
Heartbeat, why do you miss when my baby kisses me? Heartbeat, why does a love kiss stay in my memory? Riddle it and sing to me love story, and bring to me love's glory. Heartbeat, why do you miss when my baby kisses me?
They put it out at 9:30 on Friday night, which for a police series, when all the men are in the pub, is not the right time. And I think they got the shock of their lives when first week it went in at network number 7, second week network number 4, and then on. And they, my God, we've got a hit on our hands. And it stayed there for a very, very, very long time until Greengrass left. When I had my stroke, I left after 10 years, about 10 years. After I'd got over the stroke, I went there I could only sit down. I went there to finish off the episode I was taken ill during, because I was taken ill during filming. I finished that off, and then about 6 months later, they decided to do a thing called The Royal. And Keith Richardson rang me and said, we want to do this, will you do it? Because you only have to lie in bed and be in a wheelchair. I said, of course I can. Because he knew I could perform, because I'd done the end of Greengrass. So I said, yeah. So I went back, but they only used me to get the ratings. And after I did 7 episodes. They showed 6 the first year and kept 1 so that the viewers would think I was in it all next year. But they got rid of me then because I was a bit expensive, because they were still having to pay me my full whack. When people come to me and say, you know, I'm sending my son, daughter to drama school, I always say, don't waste your money. Don't waste your money. Get them to be able to go up there and do a comedy spot on there. Just choose a character, put a few jokes in there, and go on there and do it. Because you see, if a producer or a director or a casting director don't give you a job, if you're just an actor, you don't work. But in my case, I have, since I've had the stroke and everything, I've done many shows to 3,000 people, you know, mostly for charity, of course, because fortunately, I don't need the money anymore, because I don't spend anything. Virtually everything's given to me. If I want anything, I just ring somebody up and they say, oh no, it's on the house bill. Because for so long, certainly on television, I brought joy to the British public since 1953, which now makes that, I think, like 62 years. Now, when people have done 25 years, they have them on television. I had done 60 years, not a mention that I'd been on television for 60 years. When it came up, not a word. Someone came on to me who was in the Lake District and said he was very, very rich and wanted to put some money behind me and become my manager. He asked me to make a record of It's a Wonderful World, which I did. Sent it to him. He provided all the costs, and he said, I absolutely love it. Would you do another 9 and complete an album? And I said yes. So I did another 9 with his musician and recorder, and we did it here, and it was released, and it's got a track on of You Are So Beautiful, the one by Joe Cocker, who was one of my favourite artists.
You are so beautiful. To me.
I did an interview on Radio Leicester, and the manager of Radio Leicester, Liam McCarthy, rang me up and said, Bill, I like the interview so much. Would you come and do a program for us? And so I said, yeah. So I went and I did a 2-hour-long live program with my friend, now one of my best friends, Chris Heighton, as my producer, doing all the engineering, because I can't do that. I just do the talking, which I'm expert at. And the ratings went through the roof. And so Leo McCarthy said then initially, will you do a month? And I said yes. And I did a month. And he said, will you stay on? And I did eventually 5 years.
Now, I just want to ask you now.
Well, if you don't, nobody will.
I want you to tell us what happened 10 months ago and what your life has been like.
One night I was here, and all of a sudden this terrible pain in my back, strangely enough. And my daughter rang the ambulance, and they came over, examined me, and with blue lights flashing, they took me to the Leicester Royal Infirmary, where there were 3 surgeons in all their green stuff waiting. They rushed me straight through to the operating theatre, put me on a scanner, and they looked at the scan and they came to me and said, it's useless trying to do anything because you won't survive it anyway and it won't do any good. And you'll probably be gone in 2 to 3 days. And do you want to die in the hospital or do you want to go home? I said, I'll go home, because the beds were uncomfortable anyway. And I couldn't go to the toilet like I can here, because I've got a special toilet, because I've got a big John toilet seat, which allows me to be independent, and which is wonderful, as you well know, because you've used it. And that was 11 months and 17 days ago, which is incredible. I'd been to say goodbye to all my friends, and I rung all my friends and said, I'm just letting you know, probably be gone in a couple of days. And now I feel that I've cheated everybody. I feel embarrassed living this long. I am ready to go, because the doctors have told me, any day, because I have had an aortic aneurysm, which usually takes you immediately. But it hasn't taken me yet. But you see, there aren't many people who are as cantankerous as I am. And I'll do anything to upset people, I'm afraid. I love the fun about life. I love it. I love making people laugh. I have lived a life that nobody could have envisioned. I've done everything in the theatre but ballet. That's about the only thing. I've even done a cod one of those. And I don't think many people will employ me. They might after seeing this. You never know. This is why I will do anything to further my cause. That is why I made the album 2 years ago. You never know. Somebody might play it when I'm dead.
What a wonderful, 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 wonderful world. I'm my own grandpa.
Am I filming well? Am I looking my usual handsome self? Thank you very much indeed. I'm talking to the camera lady at the moment, whose name is Kathryn, who is absolutely charming.
I'm my own grandpa.
Kath, who's doing camera, is the only person I know beside yourself that knows the song I Am My Own Granddad.
If I remember it correctly, it's I'm my own grandpa, I'm my own grandpa. It sounds funny, I know, but it really is so. I'm my own grandpa. Many, many years ago, when I was 23, I got married to a widow who was pretty as could be. The widow had a grown-up daughter who had a red.
My father fell in love with her, and soon they too were wed.
Naughty, 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 naughty.
It sounds funny, I know, but I think I've proved that it's so. That I am my own grandpa. Naughty. And I'm nearly an old age pensioner.
magic.